John, the Big Get, is one of the most influential sports TV executives of all time, Sean McManus.
And Andrew, we're going to talk about baseball, golf, Deion, Woj, Taylor Swift, of course, and Toy Story.
He gains 4 yards as a group of Jaguars make the tackle, and you see the sky cam being operated today by an alien, operated by the Claw as well.
At least we know he'll have all eyes on the camera.
And we're back. The Marchand and Ourand Sports Media Podcast. I'm Andrew Marchand, sports media columnist for the New York Post. He's John Ohlmeyer, the media reporter for the Sports Business Journal. And we have a big get coming up in a few minutes. Sean McManus retiring. We go long into his career. I think you're really going to enjoy that. But first, John, let's do who's up and who's down. Why don't you start us off?
All right, my who's up is Rob Manfred. He was the big get on the Marchand and Ourand Sports Media Podcast last week, and he is the commissioner of Major League Baseball.
All right, John. So we see a little trend here. You big get, and then you get a who's up. All right, pretty good for Manfred. Probably a good strategy by MLB PR, getting him on the podcast.
Well, you know what? What a season this has been for Rob Manfred. He pushed through a bunch of rule changes, including putting in the pitch clock, getting rid of the shift, making the bases bigger, and we are now seeing after a full season the effects of making those changes. Attendance at major league games, they're up more than 9%. That's a huge number, paced by big gains in Cincinnati, in Cleveland, and of course in Baltimore. It's the biggest attendance jump in the league going back to the 1980s. Game times, they have dropped 24 minutes on average, 2 hours and 40 minutes for a game. It's helping to get attendance up, TV ratings, as people are cutting the cord, are maintaining. They're still doing well on a local level. They're doing okay on the national level. I think every single rule change that Manfred pushed through has really paid off this season. So who's up? Rob Manfred.
John, my who's up is Adrian Wojnarowski from ESPN.
Woj.
He was the big winner of the Dame Lillard sweepstakes. He'd been reporting for a long time that it wasn't definitive that he's going to go to Miami, that Portland wanted to look at other places. He took a lot of slings and arrows, especially from Miami's own Dan Le Batard, who said that that Woj was bought and paid for by Portland, very personal attacks. And, Woj stuck to the facts. And then the facts, came through in terms of Portland trading Lillard to Milwaukee. And then to add a little bit cherry on top, his chief rival, Shams Charania of The Athletic and Stadium and FanDuel, he tweeted out the wrong team. In terms of when the news first broke, he had him going to Toronto instead of Milwaukee. Then he quickly changed it. And then to add to it, our boy Ben Strauss at the college's own Washington Post, he had a long story about Woj and Shams, and he called Woj a mafia don, and he called Shams a golden retriever. So it was good lines there from Strauss. So Woj is my who's up.
All right, my who's down. Did you watch your Ryder Cup, Andrew?
I watched some of it.
My who's down, Paul Azinger. He was the analyst on NBC's coverage of the Ryder Cup. For those who don't know, Europe crushed the U.S. this year. It wasn't even close. And sure enough, as the U.S. was losing in a really bad way, reports leaked out about dissension on the U.S. team. They centered on Patrick Cantlay, who refused to wear a hat, which, according to reports, was a subtle protest over the fact that golfers weren't getting paid to play in the Ryder Cup. And this matters because as you're watching the telecast, all of the European fans were taking off their hats and waving them in Cantlay's face. And viewers were like, if you didn't know that story, which I didn't, it was early morning, I'd only had a cup of coffee, you didn't know what was going on. The crowd, they were singing songs about it. And before even explaining it to the viewers, what was going on, Azinger ripped all the reports. He called it a garbage story, called it clickbait. I think it was on Sky Sports website. He took the American line that players weren't feeling well, and that's why they weren't playing well. He took that line, hook, line, and sinker. Here's an exact quote that he said on the air. Quote, "People love to tear people down in social media. It's a sewer sometimes, and I hope I'm right. I just think it's a garbage story." You hope you're right? Come on, be an analyst. Respect your viewers. The U.S. team was getting killed. Viewers wanted to know what was happening. We're not looking for a cheerleader to try to hope or will the U.S. to victory. I just thought that was terrible.
My who's down is NBC's Chris Collinsworth. Now, I like Collinsworth overall as an analyst. I think he does a very good job, well prepared, but he can be over the top sometimes and just get on a theme and not let go of it. And this past Sunday on the Jets game with Zach Wilson, it was way too much. I mean, his job, like you just said, it's not to be a cheerleader. It's to analyze the game. And Zach Wilson did end up having a pretty good game, but the way he was almost giving him a pep talk after every play that was semi-good or okay, like he was rooting for a good game, which of course you want a good game, but it just wasn't analysis. It was too much in terms of just hoping that you can find a silver lining in Zach Wilson's play. Now, I will say overall, the media, especially ex-players, have been ruthless with Zach Wilson. Maybe deserved because he did not look good, but it's kind of felt very personal. And we saw that with Rodney Harrison later that night with NBC. He later apparently apologized to Wilson because he called him garbage. It just seemed very personal. Collinsworth almost went the other way. It was too much. And so I just found it pretty grating during Sunday night's broadcast. So Chris Collinsworth gets my who's down.
All right, we have the big get, Sean McManus, coming up, but let's get to the topics. Sunday morning on ESPN Plus, you had the Jaguars and the Falcons playing from London. ESPN also had an alternate telecast, the Toy Story telecast. I know you watched part of it, Andrew. What did you think?
Yeah, I watched a good amount of it. Look, I thought it was a win for ESPN Plus and ESPN and the NFL. It was not perfect. They had a lot of technical difficulties, especially at the beginning. I do think technologically there's a lot going on there. I mean, I don't know if it matters that the game's in London, but the game was in London. And then you're trying to recreate Andy's room from Toy Story, with the players on the field. But I think it's smart. Like, look, and they're trying to brainwash young people into watching the NFL. They're worried about, people, younger people, especially not watching NFL games. So you start them off young. And so I thought it was a good idea. Obviously, it takes over from the theme of the Nickelodeon Slime Time broadcast with Nate Burleson and Noah Eagle. And I thought it was pretty good. Not perfect. I thought they could have. I think they could have cheesed it up a little more, in my opinion. I'm not, of course, the target audience. You're trying to get towards kids with parents who are watching. But I thought it was not bad.
Yeah, see, I'm going to suggest that you are identically the target audience that is going to watch this game and decide like, oh, this is how kids want to watch football. I think kids, they want to watch football. That's how I watch football as a kid. Like, I don't want to be stuck at the kids' table. I want to get to the big table. Look, it was a technical marvel what ESPN was able to do, even with some of the glitches that you talked about. So I don't want to take away from that. It really was fascinating to watch. But I think even the Nickelodeon slime game and the Toy Story game, I have kids. That's not how they watch it. My kids would have sat down and watched that, and they wouldn't have lasted past one commercial interruption. I think this is for millennials or young Gen Xers who want to just kind of go retro and remember their youths fondly, and that's how they want to watch it. I think that there's a lot of press and a lot of ink being spilled on things that aren't really doing a lot to generate younger viewers.
So, John, I don't want to overdo it here, but you could not be more wrong. The reason, first off, it's an alt cast. If this was your only choice, then sure. All right. But you have to opt into that. I mean, this is a lot of opting in. You have to opt into ESPN. First, the game's at 9:30. So a lot of people aren't going to know the game's on. Secondly, you got to have ESPN Plus. Then you got to opt into that. Then you got to opt into Toy Story. It's an effort to get to Toy Story. So I'm sure, they didn't get 1 million people watching this. But I think it's worth the attempt. And I don't think it hurts. Like I think with the where we are with technology, it's different than when you're doing like, Booger McFarland happened to be on this broadcast, but when you had like the Booger Mobile, you're trying to recreate how you broadcast a game on Monday Night Football and have a guy, on a crane, then we had no other choices back then. So I think when you do an altcast, you're giving people choices and you're trying out new things. And so, yeah, if your kids wanted to watch the game normally, you could. Fowler, Riddick, and Orlovsky were doing the game. Just had a flip on ESPN Plus. I watched their broadcast as well, and so I had a double TV going. So you could watch both. So you had to opt in. So that's why you're entirely wrong.
No, well, of course I agree with that. I mean, the whole idea of alternate telecasts is something that helps expand the number of people that are watching. I'm just suggesting to you that these telecasts tailored to kids are really tailored to 18 to 34-year-olds that want to sort of recreate their youth.
You said it. All right, we got to talk about Taylor Swift. You just said Taylor twice. So we have to talk about Taylor Swift.
I've got a blank space, baby, and I'll write your name.
We got to talk about Taylor Swift, and we are a sports media podcast. I just said you were wrong about something. We both agree that the idea that Taylor Swift is really impacting TV ratings is kind of preposterous.
Well, I think she's impacting TV ratings. I think that there is a little bit of a bump, but I think it's at the edges there. 27 million people tuned into the Chiefs Jets. I don't think that means that 20 million of them were Swifties. I mean, you had...
Well, how many Swifties? Well, hold on a second. How many do you think, just again, obviously we don't know, but how many people do you think she's bringing to that number?
1 million, maybe.
A million?
Tops?
All right, well,
I don't know.
I
that's off the top of my head.
I mean, 1 million sounds like that's actually pretty significant. If 1 million more people watch because of Taylor Swift watching the game, then forget it. I take back my preposterous.
I don't know. Like you caught me off guard. I have no idea. All I know is that the NFL is, for as long as we've been doing this podcast and well before, it is the most popular TV programming there is, period. And in prime time on Sunday Night Football, you had the defending champions with Patrick Mahomes and, yes, Travis Kelce playing against a New York team. New York, the biggest media market in the country, and it was a one-score game. Do you think that was going to do well with or without Taylor Swift being in the skybox?
No, 100%. That you made your point in your newsletter that comes out Monday evenings that I thought was really good because that's a great matchup, and it was a compelling game. That's probably the biggest factor in terms of the ratings, like what you just said. And then you had a game that went down to the wire, but it's a huge number, however you look at it. All right, more huge numbers. Deion Sanders. These ratings are unbelievable, John.
Deion Sanders, 7.2 million viewers, the most watched college football game last weekend. They tuned into USC at Colorado. It peaked at over 10 million viewers. I mean, this is a team that won no games. I think won one game the season before. It was not a TV draw at all for decades. And now all of a sudden they are the highlight of the college football season. And they're determining where all the pregame shows go. They're getting the best time slots. I had thought going into this game that as we get further into the season, the networks are going to start to focus a lot more on teams that are jockeying to make the playoffs. I don't know. I don't know if that's the case. I mean, these numbers are still really, really big.
You know who's a huge winner in this whole Deion Colorado renaissance that we've seen? It's been both Fox and ESPN, but starting next year, ESPN has a huge advantage as Colorado moves to the Big 12. They'll have 2/3 of the Big 12 games. So if Deion stays, they continue to do well. That is that Big 12 deal was great for Brett Yormark and the Big 12, and obviously was terrible for the Pac-12. But ESPN, big winner with Colorado. If Deion stays, if they continue to be good, and you really think he'll stay at least a couple more years, that you foresee this being a ratings possible bonanza for ESPN/ABC and a little bit for Fox, but 2/3 of those games of the Big 12 games are going to be ESPN's.
Andrew, ESPN got rid of Jeff Van Gundy, got rid of Mark Jackson. You had a little bit of news on Mark Jackson in your newsletter that comes out Sunday nights, New York Sports Post Plus.
There you go.
New York Post Sports Plus. Sorry.
And Monday mornings, but you're pretty close.
Oh, I see. I read them Sunday night. Don't you tweet that out Sunday night?
I don't know, unless you're hacking my computer.
All right.
It comes out 6 in the morning.
Let me do that again.
No, leave it.
All right, leave it.
People need to know. John dreams of reading the newsletter on Sunday nights, and he thinks he's got the news before. He's like, no, you know what it is? You read it, and you're like, oh, I already knew that. I knew that.
I already knew that. By the way, I totally read it that way. Yeah, there's nothing new here.
No,
I immediately,
you didn't know this, though.
I send Abe an email, and I say, Abe, there's nothing new here. Nothing. I already knew all that stuff.
Mark Jackson was let go in June, at the end of June, along with Jeff Van Gundy. A little bit of surprise that they took apart their number one broadcast, which was the most well-received broadcast that they had in terms of their top sports, not including probably Buck and Aikman now with Monday Night Football. And then you could argue some others, but Mark Jackson looks like he's going to do some games for MSG Network. And the Knicks, they have Clyde Frazier, who's their number one analyst, with Mike Breen, of course, who was the longtime partner of Van Gundy and Jackson. The Knicks and MSG are also interested in Van Gundy. That looks very unlikely to happen. The way the contracts work, ESPN is not necessarily letting everyone do anything they want. It seems like it's case by case. I don't really understand why that is fully, but Mark Jackson looks like he might do some Knicks games. It's trending that way. I'd say I think it's going to happen, but it's not done yet. So that's an interesting development. Jordan Cornette is going to be working for Peacock. Former ESPNer also let go. It's going to be on their Big Ten coverage, which was also in that newsletter. You probably knew about it, but it was also in that newsletter on Sunday with some other news and nuggets as well. Before we get to Sean McManus, Sinclair, you had some timeline on Sinclair and MLB. Last week we had Manfred basically saying they run a terrible business. It's not our fault. We have a good product, and they don't know what they're doing. That's what I took of it. That was my translation. It was not that far off, I think. When you look at Sinclair and the future, what do you see?
Well, last week I had David Preschlack, who runs up Diamond Sports Group, as my Who's Down. And the reason is that last week was supposed to be the week that really determined the future of the Bally Sports RSNs, because you had a deal with Comcast that was coming up. You had negotiations going on with DirecTV that were happening. You had the negotiations with the creditors that were going on. And what happened was everybody kicked the can down the road. Diamond asked for an extension to file a plan that the judge has not okayed yet, but is likely to okay. That'll extend it another 2 months. Comcast they haven't signed anything yet, but what I'm told is they've agreed to an extension that sort of goes into next year. And DirecTV has said, we're not going to open up our deal. We're just going to let it run its course to next fall. So the date that you should have circled, if you care about this, on your calendar is February 29th, Leap Day, because that is the day that Diamond Sports deal with Charter is up. And we spent a lot of time on this podcast talking about Charter and Disney. Charter is gearing for a fight, and that's going to be a really, really important one for to determine the future of the Bally Sports RSNs.
It just seems appropriate. It's on Leap Day for some reason. I don't know why, but it just does to me. All right, John, let's bring in the big get. Sean McManus retiring 27 years as the head of CBS Sports. 5.5 of those years also he headed up news at CBS. Most recent title. I was impressed by this title, John. Chairman of CBS Sports. I mean, you're not president, not CEO, you're chairman. It's so important. Sean, first off, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, guys. I love this podcast, listen to it every week. So good job. And I'm happy to join you for a few minutes.
Well, Sean, big news last week. After 27 years, you announced that you're stepping down as chairman of CBS Sports after the Masters. I've spent some Sunday afternoons in the fall with you, and I've trailed around with you occasionally at the Final Four. You have one of the great jobs in the world, certainly in the country. I mean, running CBS Sports and running the division. Why are you stepping away from it?
It's a good question. It is a great job, and I've often said to people that I would do this job for free. Having said that, it'll be almost 28 years after the Masters next year. We've had a succession plan in place really for more than a decade with David Burson, who you both know well, who has been my number two. He is ready to take over. The good news is that most of our really marquee events are secure through the end of the decade. And I just thought I've had a great run. I want to do other things, not necessarily professionally, but perhaps in a nonprofit way. And I just thought the timing was right. I've enjoyed pretty much everything the last 27 years, although the industry is much more challenging now than it's ever been. But I'm ready to move on. And my two bosses, George Cheeks and Bob Backish, and I really agreed in June of 22 that this would be the best timing. So I think the timing is great for me. It's great for David, and I think it's great for CBS Sports and Paramount.
Have you processed what it's going to be like next September, probably on week 1 of the NFL season, when you're used to being part of the action? Have you processed what that's going to be like for you, or how you're going to counteract sort of the feelings that you have coming out of that?
I've thought about that a lot. It'll definitely be different. Having done it since 1998. I think I've done probably enough of those Sundays. But listen, I love being in the studio. I love the camaraderie. I will miss that, but I still feel really good about my decision. And the Masters in 2025. I'll watch that from home for the first time since 1997, and you can go through all of our other great events, whether it's the March Madness or SEC, soon to be Big Ten football, PGA of America, PGA Tour, all those events. I'm lucky that I've not only had a chance to oversee the presentation, but I've gotten to know the men and the women who are involved in those great organizations, and they'll be friends of mine for life. So, it'll be an adjustment for me, but I'm definitely ready for it.
And Sean, you're known for deal making, and we're gonna get into get behind the scenes and some of those deals that you've made, at your time at CBS Sports. But take us back first to, a lot of people, everyone basically listening to this podcast knows your dad was the legendary sportscaster Jim McKay. Just as a kid growing up in that environment, what was your goals? And when you looked at sports media, what was that like for you? And then you take it through, how your career started and where you are now. Can you take us through that?
Sure. Listen, it was thrilling to be the son of Jim McKay. I got to go to Indianapolis 500s, U.S. Open golf events, the World Synchronized Swimming Championships in Albany, New York, to the World Barrel Jumping Championships in Grossinger's, New York. So I grew up in and around the men and women of ABC Sports as they were really inventing sports television in many ways underneath the great Roone Arledge. When I was 11 years old, I went to the Jacksonville Open PGA Tour event in Florida with my dad, and Chuck Howard, the producer, said, Sean, would you like to work? And ignoring all the child labor laws, I said, I'd love to. So I spent the next 3 days sweeping out the truck, emptying ashtrays because everybody smoked then, bringing refreshments to the announcers and the crew. And when the event was over on Sunday, Erwin Weiner, who was the production manager and would one day become Roone's top financial CFO, said to me, Sean, you go over and get in the pay line. I said, what's a pay line? And he said, well, that's where people get paid. So I got in line. I walked up to the front. I signed my name and I got $25 in a little yellow envelope. And at that moment, I said to myself, if they're going to pay me to do this job, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I really, at age 11, wanted to produce and direct big time sporting events, big, golf events like the Masters and the PGA Championship and the World Series and the Super Bowl and all these other great events. That was my ambition, and I did.
John, if I can interrupt you for a quick second, you didn't want to get behind the microphone like your dad, though.
I did not. I thought that would be a hard act to follow, and I never gravitated towards that. I did have a reel-to-reel tape recorder when I was 7 or 8 years old. I was a big New York Yankees fan, and I would do the play-by-play in my head of some of the greats, from Mickey Mantle to Elston Howard to Joe Pepitone, and I did that. But I really loved the live production much more so than I did the behind the microphone. And I also realized that to get involved in broadcasting, you really got to start at a very small local station. There was no ESPN in these days. There was no Fox Sports. There were basically 3 broadcast networks, and I knew that I couldn't start right away at a broadcast network if I were a commentator, but if I was in production, I could do that. I did a brief stint because my mother wanted me to at Solomon Brothers in my junior year at Duke University. My mother, having seen the lifestyle that my dad lived with being away pretty much every weekend, thought that I should at least be exposed to a rational way of making a living. So I had an internship. I was the only intern at Solomon Brothers that wasn't majoring in economics and finance. Had a good time. And when it was over, I said to my parents, I think I can make a lot of money on Wall Street, but my heart is in sports production. So when I graduated from Duke University, I got a job as a production assistant, which is the lowest person on the totem pole. I did college football with the great Chuck Howard. I did golf. I did a lot of shows with the great Don Ohlmeyer and Chet Forty. And then after 2 years, I decided it was better not to be at the same network that my father worked at. So I called up Geoff Mason and Don Ohlmeyer previously, who were 2 of Roon's top lieutenants at ABC Sports, who were at that time running NBC Sports. Went over to see Geoff Mason. I explained to him that I wanted to get involved in other parts of television other than production. He said, write down on a yellow piece of paper everything you want to do in sports television. I did that night, met him for breakfast the following morning. And I gave him the list, and he said, yep, you can do that. On-air promotion, rights negotiation, that we probably don't need for this. But basically, like 9 out of the 10 things I wanted to do, he said, when can you start? I said, let me give notice, and I can start in a couple weeks. At that point, Don Ohlmeyer, who, as many of us know, was a bigger-than-life character, walked in, lit up a Marlboro cigarette because he constantly smoked cigarettes, put his feet up on Jeffrey's desk, and he said, what's going on here? And Jeffrey said, I just offered Sean the job as manager of programming. And Ohlmeyer looked at me and said, great, just don't screw it up, and walked out of the building. Out of the office, although the word that he used was not screw, it began with an F. But that was my first day of being a non-production executive, and I was so fortunate that the vice president of programming, a man named Dick Auerbach, left when I was 27 years old, and Jeffrey and Arthur Watson, the president, called me in and said, do you want to be vice president of programming at NBC Sports? I said, in a minute. So I probably wasn't quite ready for the job. It was a huge step up, but I learned a lot. I worked 7 days a week, and always at that point wanted one day to run a network sports division. Again, in those days, there were only three of them. There was no Fox. ESPN was just a burgeoning cable network. So I set my sights on that. After 9 years, decided I would work for Mark McCormack, who invented, as you know, sports marketing. He had a division called Trans World International, which was the largest independent producer of sports programming. So I joined IMG, had a really, really good time working for Mark and the legendary Barry Frank, who, as you know, was involved in so many big deals during those years. And then one day, I got a call from Peter Lund, who was running CBS, who asked me to have breakfast with him. And I told my boss, Barry Frank, I was going over there, and he said, I'll bet you he offers you the job to run CBS Sports, because we both knew they were looking for somebody. I said, I don't really know about that. He offered me the job. He said, think about it. I came back a week later and said, if you and Westinghouse, which was the corporate parent of the time of CBS, are really serious about sports and really serious about getting the NFL back, and if I can run the division and make all the necessary changes, I'm your man. And he said, great. I said, listen, I'd love the job. And he said to me, don't you want to know what I'm going to pay you? And I said, listen, Peter, I'm sure you're going to pay me well. I'm sure if I do well, I'll make a lot of money, but I'm not making this move for money. I'm making it for opportunity. And that was in 1996. I hate to say it, but 1996. And I started, I went into Mark McCormack and said, listen, Mark, I got a job to run CBS. And he said, well, you have to take it. And I said, how long? I said, I'm not going to leave in a rush. How long would you like me to stay for the transition at Trans World International? And he said, I don't know, 9 or 10 months. I said, Mark, I said, that's a little extreme. But I gave him 2.5 months, and I started the first week in December. And the first show I watched was a college basketball game leading into the Army-Navy game. And I called the control room, and I talked to a man named Arthur Harris, who was running operations. And I said, Arthur, it's Sean McManus. And I gave him a couple of suggestions on the show. And he later said to me, it was the first time that a president of CBS Sports had actually called the control room in many, many years. So I sort of, laid down my card that I was going to be very involved in every aspect of CBS Sports. So it's been a great run. I've, as I mentioned, I've been able to learn from people, like Roone Arledge and Chuck Howard and Don Ohlmeyer and Jeffrey Mason and Mark McCormack and Barry Frank. So I've been incredibly blessed, and I wouldn't do anything differently than I've done. And I will always remember that Peter Lund took a chance on me and gave me the opportunity to run CBS Sports. And
can we pick it up there, Sean? So when you look at, to me, and John, if you agree or disagree, tell me. But if you look at the NFL, you've said it, and we all know is the most important property for all these networks and platforms. And you had Fox's move with Rupert Murdoch and company in '93 to take the NFC package away from Fox. Then you come in, like you just told us, you become president, and the goal then is to get CBS Sports back in the NFL. So you're Sean McManus, you just got this job. What do you do? Who do you call? How does that happen?
It's a really good question, and I thought about it almost constantly every single day when I got the job in 1996. I started out by making sure that I had a good relationship with Paul Tagliabue and Roger Goodell, who was his top lieutenant at that point. I went to see him a lot. I went to see, within about 10 days of getting the job, with Mel Karmazin, who had a great relationship with a lot of the owners through his radio deals. I went to see Robert Kraft. I went to see Jerry Jones. I went to see the Rooney family. I had breakfast with Bob Tisch, who was the co-owner of the New York Giants. And I said, listen, we want the NFL back. I know it's going to be a huge long shot, but just think about the history and the tradition that goes along with CBS Sports and the NFL. We want back in, and we're willing to pay a lot of money for it. And I think it's going to be good for the NFL and good for CBS Sports and good for the fan. So I really spent a solid year. I hired Tony Petitti in February of '97. He literally would come into my office pretty much every day after work was over, and we would sit there and strategize. So I worked as many people as I possibly could. I did a lot of internal planning to try to get the money that I thought we needed. We focused on the AFC package. We believed that NBC was going to be going after Monday Night Football, and that might leave an opportunity open for us. We came up with a figure of $500 million, which was not quite twice what NBC was paying for the AFC package. We believed that we could monetize it in a way that made it financially attractive for us. It lined up perfectly with the AFC markets and our television owned and operated stations in New York and Boston and San Francisco and Denver and Miami. And we put together a very, very aggressive bid. Robert Kraft was the main contact for us from the television committee. Spent a lot of time with Robert, convincing him that this was a good move. And when NBC was more focused on Monday Night Football, that gave us an opportunity to move in quickly, to do a deal, set the marketplace at a very high level. Some people thought we paid too much. And when people asked me at the time, and I still say this today, why did you think the NFL was worth so much money? I said, because we're the only network ever to have the NFL and then having lost it. So we know the value, not just for CBS Sports, but for the entire CBS television network at the time. So we got the deal done. I literally couldn't believe it when we got it. We made our offer on a Thursday night before the AFC Championship game in 1998. NBC had a right to match our offer until noon on the following Monday. Paul Tagliabue said, "I will call you if they match your number." I was in Connecticut at the time. Every time the phone rang, I said a prayer and said, "Please don't make it be Paul Tagliabue." When Petitti called me almost hourly, I said, "Stop calling me. My heart can't take it anymore." Monday at roughly 11 o'clock in the morning, I got a call from Paul Tagliabue, and he said, "You have a deal. I'm sending over Joe Ferrer, who was one of his assistants in the programming area." Joe brought over a short form agreement. My hand was literally shaking when I signed it. Paul had already signed it. I signed it. Tony was with me, and I took a breath and couldn't believe it. I started telling people, and you literally heard screams in the halls of CBS Sports. All of production and management was on the same 25th floor. People started running into my office. Literally, people were crying. I can't describe the feeling of exhilaration. Somebody went out and bought a number of bottles of champagne. We had a champagne toast in our conference room. And it took a while for it to sink in. The first people I called were my parents down in Maryland to tell them, because they know that I had lived and breathed this for well over a year. So it was just, I was cognizant of the fact that it was such a long shot, but it was certainly up until that point, the greatest moment of my professional career. And I didn't do it alone. I had a lot of people working with me. I had a lot of money to spend. and proud to say that we solidified Mel Karmazin's statement, which is, if I can make $1 on the NFL, it's a good investment. And we, in fact, made more than $1 every single year of that first 8-year deal. So, and you mentioned it, Andrew, you can't have a broadcast network today, and even so back in 1998, a successful broadcast network without the NFL. When we lost it in 94, we went from being number 1 in primetime to being number 3. When we got the NFL back in 1998, in less than 2 years, we were back to being number 1. So it was great for CBS Sports, but it was great for the whole CBS broadcasting network also. And that, I don't know if you want to dive into this, but that's even more true today. The television bundle as we know it, where people have cable or satellite hookups for their home, which is declining, there's no question, it's declining, but without the NFL and other sports events, but particularly the NFL, I really believe that bundle would not be held together. And when we are negotiating with our affiliates or with the providers like Comcast and DirecTV, without the leverage of the NFL, those negotiations would either be extremely difficult or impossible. And I don't want to minimize our other sports. They're all really important to holding the bundle together. But the biggest hammer that we have is the NFL. And when you look at promoting, and now it's not just promoting CBS that we do with the NFL, it's promoting Top Gun by having Tom Cruise do the opening of our AFC Championship game, or Nickelodeon with the broadcast we do with them, or our news, the way we integrate our promotion for 60 Minutes and the evening news into our programming, and Paramount Plus, where sports is one of the largest drivers of subscriptions and new subscriptions for Paramount Plus. So the NFL now and CBS Sports as a whole is really committed and really involved in everything that Paramount does. But you can't overestimate or overemphasize the importance of the NFL.
$500 million. That sounds like a bargain now, Sean.
Well, we doubled
it. Them.
We doubled it the next time, and then we doubled it the next time after that. So yeah, I mean, when you think about paying $2 billion for a property, it's tough to wrap your head around that. But when you do the math and you do and quantify and evaluate all the benefits that brings to Paramount, and as I said, it's no longer just the value it brings to CBS Sports or CBS Television Network, it's all of Paramount. It's almost difficult to calculate, and I'm not at all taking credit for the success of Top Gun or Mission Impossible or Survivor a week ago, where we had Geoff Probst in our NFL coverage promoting the premiere of Survivor. We're not taking credit for that at CBS Sports, but I can tell you we were very instrumental in guaranteeing that those properties have become a success.
Sean, I want to talk about the current state of media, and you mentioned the bundle, and we've had Michael Nathanson on as the big get. He's of course with Moffett Nathanson, who's questioning whether CBS and NBC, they put the NFL games on Paramount Plus and on Peacock. Have you noticed? Take us through your decision to sort of leak out of the bundle by doing that.
We try to reach the consumer and the sports fan any way that we can. And if he has a cable hookup, he can watch it on his CBS television station. If he has no cable hookup, but he has streaming, he can watch it on Paramount Plus. We have the co-exclusive rights for the mobile rights to our games, so he and she can watch it on their mobile devices. So as the traditional cable bundle is diminishing each year, we're trying to make up for that. And one of the main ways we're doing it is on Paramount Plus. Our commercials run on Paramount Plus, so we get credit from the advertisers and from the Nielsen ratings. So we are still incredibly strong believers in the power of broadcast television, as quite frankly are the commissioners and the men and women who are running these sports leagues. If you talk to Roger or Adam or Gary or Bob, and you guys talked to Bob Manfred last week, broad-based exposure is really important. It drives consumer interest. It drives fan interest. Roger was very upfront during these last negotiations. I want my main product and the vast majority of my content available to every television home in America. So, the idea of not being on broadcast television for the Super Bowl was a non-starter for the NFL, which is true for many of its highest profile games. Yes, you have a couple of games exclusively on ESPN Plus, like this past weekend. You have exclusive games on Peacock, which I understand. Those games are always available on the over-the-air station in the local market, and they're much more the exception than the rule. But if you look at the value of the 425 window, which is always the highest rated window of the year, or NBC's showcase on Sunday night, or ESPN Monday, or even Thursday night on Amazon, those are incredibly appointment viewing events, and they're all available on free television in the home markets. And the vast majority of them are available in every television home in America, especially when you get to the playoffs. And I know that's why Adam wants his NBA Finals on broadcast television. He believes that will help perpetuate the attractiveness of that programming. People talk about, why don't you put the Super Bowl on a pay-per-view, charge people $25? Everybody would pay. You get 115 million people watching. Everybody would buy that. And, maybe in year one they would. And then year two, maybe the matchup is not quite as compelling. So yeah, I'm gonna pass this year. But the Super Bowl would not be the Super Bowl if it was not available for every television home in America. And that's true today, and I think that's going to be true for many years to come.
Andrew, let me ask one more quick one before I go back to you. You mentioned Adam Silver, you mentioned the NBA. I'm pretty certain that you and David Burson have run the numbers to decide whether or not to make a play on the NBA. I haven't heard CBS's name associated with bidding for it. Where do you stand, Sean?
Our program schedule, fortunately, is really full. During the NBA season, the beginning of the season, obviously we have NFL and college football. And then when you get into January through June, which is the heart of the NBA season, we've got golf pretty much every weekend, unless we have the basketball tournament in March. We have regular season basketball. On the CBS Broadcast Network, we really don't have the shelf space to be a carrier of NBA in any big way. I think it would probably be potentially a good product for Paramount Plus, but quite frankly, with the NFL and UEFA Champions League and all the other soccer we have and all the other sports events that are on Paramount Plus, there really just isn't the shelf space. I'd love to have the NBA. I think it's an amazing property. I think both Turner and ESPN, ABC have done a magnificent job promoting it and producing it, but it really is a non-starter for us just because of our current programming schedule.
Sean, when you look at the future, what's the biggest challenges though when you look for the traditional, you guys, Fox is now traditional, NBC, ESPN, ABC. Where do you see it going 5-10 years ago? Like where does your mind go in terms of where the business is going and what's going to happen?
if anybody tells you they know the answer to that question, Andrew, they are not telling you the truth, because we don't. We think we know what's going to happen. We think direct to consumer is going to continue to be more plentiful in this country. We believe the traditional bundle will reach a certain level, and I don't know whether that's 55 million or whatever it is. We still think that's going to be viable because of the primarily because of the sports that are available. We believe that a significant amount of the people who are dropping the bundle are picking up a D2C service, which is why we want Paramount Plus to be so vibrant and have the NFL and have UEFA and have our big time sporting events. So, when I look to the future, I think we have a good strategy. I think the deals that we have, which I mentioned, are for the major broadcast properties, are through the end of this decade. I think they'll be good deals for us. I think they will pan out, but I can't predict what's going to happen in 5 years. But I think I can predict that if you have a big time sporting event, that is going to be the absolute, no question, the best way to attract a live audience on television. And I don't care if you're on your phone or your laptop or your desktop or your big screen TV, which I think is still going to be the predominant way to view sporting events. You're going to attract a big audience. And as it becomes more and more difficult to attract that audience, sports, I think, is going to be more valuable 5 years from now than it is today, because it's going to be increasingly more difficult to generate that huge audience. So, I feel good about the business. I'm going to be rooting for CBS Sports on a daily basis. I think they're going to do great. But I'm also going to be rooting for the sports television business as a whole, because if all I'll use 4 or 5, however many outlets you want to say are involved in big sporting events, if one of them is successful, probably all of them will be successful. And if one of them is failing, it's a pretty good barometer that most of the industry is failing. So, I look forward to being a keen observer on the outside. Anytime David wants to call me for my advice, I'm happy to give it to him, but he knows what he's doing. And I feel really good about CBS Sports, and I feel really good about the industry in the future.
Sean, every once in a while, I write about the broadcasting moves of, broadcasters leaving, moving around, and, in their situations. I know you guys always appreciated that. When you look at your career, what is the one move that you made in terms of broadcasters that you're most proud of, and why?
That's a really good question, and a lot of them come to mind, to be honest with you. Vern Lundquist, taking him off the number 2 game at the NFL and doing SEC football, not only incredibly catapulted Vern's career, but established our presence in college football in a way that wouldn't have been possible if we hadn't made that move. Bringing over Dick Enberg and Greg Gumbel to CBS Sports when we got the NFL, I was particularly proud of. Moving Jim Nantz to the number 1 role on NFL football, I think was really important. I have a lot of them. Promoting and nurturing the contract of Ian Eagle, who I think is, the best of his generation right now, was really, really important. Trevor Immelman, and I know I'm not answering your question, and I apologize.
Don't worry, I'll follow up.
I'm sure you will. Trevor Immelman, I think I can't say enough about how good he is at that job. And I think he's going to be the best ever when history is written. Very proud of bringing over Tony Romo. I know there is more chatter about Tony than there than there was at the very beginning. But I'm really proud of that. I think it set a new standard for NFL broadcasting. So, I can look at the list of people, and I'm just so proud of our on-air talent. I'm really proud of the way we have grown our female announcers and reporters, whether it's Tracy on NFL football, or Amanda on PGA Tour golf, and now NFL football also. The work that Beth Mowens has recently done for us, and the other women. I think that they've distinguished themselves. Leslie Visser is another good example. They've just distinguished themselves really well. And I think, listen, I'm not objective, but I think we have the best lineup of announcers. If you look across every single sport, the best lineup and the deepest lineup of announcers in the industry. And, that's a tribute to their hard work and the planning that we've put together.
When you, Tony Romo, in 2017, you hired him. He became a sensation. Obviously, then 3 years after, he's courted by ESPN. You give him a 10-year contract that was, total value $180 million. And now you just said, like, there's been, some backlash. I wrote about the intervention, which, again, I know you guys appreciated. We don't have to litigate that. But just where do you see Tony right now in terms of where he is in his career and what you see from your chair?
Well, I get to decide what we're going to litigate on this podcast. Just because it says Marchand and Ourand on the billboard doesn't mean I can't do my fair share of litigation. I'm here voluntarily. May I remind you both?
The senior statesman of the industry, absolutely.
Listen, there was no way that the incredible positive reaction overboard was going to last with Tony, especially in social media, which you all know is so cruel. And, when Tony kept doing games the way he does, there was some negative backlash to a couple of the games he had. I think that's natural, and I think that's the nature of social media. As you and I have talked, Andrew, there was no intervention in any way, shape, or form. I sit down with our commentators all the time. I'm having lunch with Bill Raftery. I know exactly the two suggestions I'm going to make to him, and I'm happy to share it with you. The two suggestions I'm going to make to him. I think he's the best in the business, but I'm having lunch with him and David Burson next week to talk about how he can get better. I talk to our golf talent all the time, how they can get better. I happen to have a meeting with Tony Romo, and yes, I flew to Dallas because I thought that was the most convenient for him. I flew to Dallas, and we had a very similar discussion as I've had with many, many members of our announce team. He took it well. I emphasized the positive and some ways I thought he could be better. We talked about specifics like telestrating more on the offensive and defensive line, which I think, and our production people are tired of hearing me say this, but I think the line play at least half the time determines the success or failure of a play. And I, on a napkin, drew, suggested ways that he could more highlight, the pulling guard or the kick out block. He loved that. He said, you're right. I love that. He then talked to Jim Rickoff about doing more end zone and sky cam replays from behind the quarterback. We talked about, being more active in the production meetings, which he loved with our crew. We talked about, being concise and getting in and out and letting the play-by-play man have his time and letting the broadcast breathe a little bit. We talked about when the game is at its absolute peak and everybody in the stadium is yelling and going crazy, just to make sure that you don't get taken away by the moment and you remember that you're still an analyst. One of the things that makes Tony so great is that he's such a huge fan. And I think the viewer at home really enjoys that. Sometimes it's easy to get caught up and be a fan And I just reminded him, you're a broadcaster first and a fan second. Totally collaborative. It wasn't some sort of come to Jesus meeting where I said, I'm coming down and you're going to listen to me. As I said, I've had similar calls with so many of our talent in the past, and I'm continuing. I had a call with Tony last week to talk about the Jets Dallas game. Again, collaborative, pointed out the positive, pointed out some of the areas I think we can do better. I had the same call with Jim Nance. Not an intervention in any way, shape, or form. So I did, Andrew, as you well know, take offense to that word because I thought it wasn't true. But it certainly raises the topic. But I think the chemistry that Jim and Tony have this year, and the quality of what both of them have done is as good as anybody on television. And I will tell you that I think the quality of NFL commentary today is higher than it's ever been. And I'm not going to start going down and listing names, but I guess I'll list a few. I mean, having Joe and Troy at ESPN has changed the entire perception of ESPN's production. It really has. It was instrumental, I feel, in them getting a Super Bowl, to be honest with you. I think Greg, in his second year, or third year, I guess, is terrific. And again, I could go down the list, Chris or Herb on Amazon. I'm just blown away by the talent that all these commentators have. And I could say the same thing for play-by-play. So
how do you think Tom Brady will be?
I don't think anybody knows until the red light comes on. Listen, Tom is the greatest of all time. He's engaging. I listen to his podcast. I enjoy listening to him. If he puts the same kind of effort and commitment, which I know he will, into broadcasting that he did in his athletic career, I think he can do a really good job. You have to be all in. You got to watch tape on Monday and Tuesday, or even Sunday night, as Phil Simms does. You got to watch a lot of tape. You got to call coaches and players. It's a full-time job. Now, it's only 6 months of the year, but it's a full-time job. And I think he knows that. And I think Tom has a lot of potential, and he's got unmistakable credibility when he comes into the booth. So that's certainly a benefit. And I know the Fox team well. They'll prepare him. They'll have their own interventions with him, which will be forthcoming. But no, I think, listen, I welcome him. Anything that's good for the NFL and anything that brings positive attention to the NFL is good for all of us. So if he decides to do it, which it sounds like he does, I wish him the best of luck, and I'll be rooting for him without question.
Andrew, I have one final question. It's kind of a Romo-esque type of question, Sean, but you took a big risk in hiring Tony Romo and putting him at the number one analyst spot immediately. And it's just a huge risk that really paid off for a number of years. Who do you identify as current NFL players that you think are going to be really good in the broadcast booth?
There are people who have decided not to go into the industry who I thought would be great. But I don't really have Phillip Rivers being one of them for sure. But I don't really have a list. What happens is when they come back to New York from doing a game, our producers and directors and talent will often recommend somebody, a player or a coach they met in the production meeting who would be good. I've always thought Mike Tomlin, if he ever wanted to do it, would be terrific. Sean McVay, I think, would be terrific also. But when I was at the Super Bowl, it was the Seattle New England Super Bowl, And I was at the Friday night party talking to Jerry Jones, who happened to have Tony as his guest. And I just asked Tony, how do you see the game tomorrow? And he, in an incredibly concise way, broke down the Seahawks defense, what the Patriots needed to do to break that vaunted defense, and just in five, sort of talked for like 5 minutes. And my, David Burson was with me. And I said, thank you, Tony. And we subsequently, left. And I said, that guy is going to be the #1 analyst at a network. I just hope it's ours. So you never know, as I said, until the red light comes on. But I felt really good about it. I thought it was the right decision, and I still stand by it. And I think it's proved to be a really successful move.
I have one more that I don't know the answer to. When your father and mother, did they go by McManus in their regular life? Or how does you didn't, so you didn't take, obviously your name is not McKay, it's McManus. How did that work out and why?
The reason my dad is known as Jim McKay is when he came to New York and was starting his career, he didn't have a lot of work, and they were launching a show called The Real McKay, which was a entertainment/news kind of a Today Show type programming. And they said, Jim, we'd like you to host The Real McKay. The only hitch is you've got to change your name to McKay. And his response was, call me Jim McKay. That's my name now. It was never changed legally. His driver's license and checkbook had James McManus on it. So it was, he got obviously well known by that name, but my name is Sean McManus, not Sean McKay. And he got very well known by that name, but he was first and foremost in his personal life, Jim McManus, and not Jim McKay.
If you got a check from your dad, it said Jim McManus.
It actually said Margaret McManus because she did all the fun.
Just like everybody else, John.
My father did not write a lot of checks.
Jim McKay, a proud graduate of Loyola High School in Baltimore. Hey,
absolutely, and Loyola Prep, the Jesuits.
Yeah, the good Jesuits there teaching them. Yeah,
exactly.
Sean, thank you very much for taking the time. It's such a rich career. We could have you on for another hour. I think hearing these stories, we appreciate it greatly.
You guys are sorry. Go ahead.
You also said you're going to root for CBS Sports. Will you root for the Marchand and Ourand Sports Media podcast as well? Now, I know CBS Sports will be your #1 thing you'll be rooting for, but our podcast, will you root for that as well or no?
You will be a very, very close second, but you'll be second. And yes, I will be rooting. And listen, I like both of you personally. We have our disagreements, which means that, you are writing the right subjects. We have our disagreements, but you're both, you're honest, you're transparent. There's no hidden agenda. And I really appreciate that. So I love the podcast, and I love the writing you guys do. So, and thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it, Sean.
Johnny, congrats on a great career. Not that you're not going anywhere yet, but still, amazing run.
Thank you.
What a treat that was for me, Andrew. I love, as people that love sports media, I love hearing those old stories that of McManus when he got started, even before he got started at CBS, and some of the bold-faced names that he brought out of there. Look, I don't think it's a stretch to say that McManus saved CBS Sports. McManus, when he got to CBS in 1996, they had lost baseball, they had lost basketball, they had the Winter Olympics that they were in the process of losing, they lost the NFL, and he came to a department that was in utter disarray. And Sean, when he came in to run CBS Sports, he was with these larger than life personalities. I mean, think Steve Bornstein was running ESPN at the time, David Hill at Fox, Dick Ebersol at NBC. And just, those are the days that I like, and those stories from those days, I love hearing them.
Yeah, no, that was tremendous. And to go inside those deals was great. And then we also talked Tony Romo, which I thought was fun. And Sean was great on that topic as well. As you probably could tell, we've had some conversations off the pod as well. But he did give some suggestions to to Tony on getting better. But listen, you gotta give him credit for Romo. I mean, that was also something I was trying to get at. I mean, like you said, he had the wherewithal and the guts to put Romo on a number one team, which we've seen happen before of people off the field. But that's the thing, like with Brady, like you don't know, like Sean said, you don't know if Brady's going to be good. You think he's going to be good. He definitely knows the game, but it's just a different view from the broadcast booth. It's one of the harder things to do. Like that's the thing. If you do the studio, there's no excuse not to be good in the studio. Like it's planned. You got a lot of people in support, and not that they don't support you, of course, in the broadcast booth, but it's a different, there's a lot of different skills. And the thing about Romo that's very good, and sometimes gets him in trouble, but he's very natural. Yeah, and that's good. Like, but you're doing national TV. So sometimes you want to, like Sean was saying, sometimes you want to bring that in a little bit because you are on national TV, but he is very natural. He sounds like he's having a conversation, which I do think is probably his biggest appeal. He just feels like someone you're just like talking to, not that I'm the analyst. So that was good. But McManus, one of the most influential sports executives of all time. We talked about Fox's move to get the NFL from CBS. Then you got to put Sean's move to get CBS the NFL back. Ebersol comes in later to get Sunday Night Football back for NBC. So a lot of moving and shaking when you talk about these deals. And so that's why McManus has got to be considered among that company with his run and its relationships. That's what he's been able to maintain and been very good at, his whole career.
Well, Andrew, that brings us to the end of another podcast, an odd podcast. The master of the board, Chris Mason, is not here. He's celebrating his 20th wedding anniversary.
Ooh.
Congratulations.
There you go, Chris. Nice job.
So what do we call AC Wyatt?
Mrs. Master of the board. Congrats to her.
What do we call AC Wyatt? The emperor of the board? Like AC is like...
Well, I don't know. We have to figure out what she is, but also getting to know Chris over the last year and a half, or a little less than a year and a half, she has to be a saint.
She undoubtedly knows her 1980s movie references, I think.
Yes,
right?
yes, he does. Yes, he probably has like a board every time she says something. She's like, "Hold on." He's like, "Hold on. Let me make a little. Let me get to the soundboard."
Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
All right. Well, AC Wyatt, of course, who runs the whole thing and took over the board this week. We appreciate him. And then we have a special goodbye for this week.
Yeah, Krista, come on. We got to see you, Krista. Krista Myers, the
social media extraordinaire,
the maven, I think is what we called you. This is your final podcast.
Yes, my final pod with you guys. It's been an amazing ride.
Where are you going?
I'm headed to do some social strategy on the agency side of sports, so I'm really excited.
Did Marchand run you off?
He did not, but he tried.
I mean, I wasn't, some of the TikToks I wasn't happy with. And I brought it to the heads and I said, listen, it's Krista and me.
That's so right.
Krista is starting a new job and
that's not, hold on, this for the record. That's not true. There's no, nobody takes that the wrong way. That is not true. That is all made up. Okay.
It's a dog eat dog world in sports.
It was John who said it.
That is
by
true.
the way, I totally, but I never said it publicly. I just went behind Krista's back. So when do you start your new job? 2 weeks?
Actually next week. So
next week?
Yeah.
And then you get married 2 weeks later.
On November 3rd.
So it's like a Band-Aid, like everything's happening at once. You just got to rip it all off.
That's how you got to do it. But no, I'm very excited. It's been a crazy couple weeks. But so is every week when you're covering sports media. So
all right. So I have one question for Krista before we say goodbye. Your top Mando memory.
Cool.
Ooh, that's great.
And be funny.
Be funny. Say something funny, Mikey.
It's like that scene from Finding Nemo where they're like, tell us a joke. You're a clownfish. Everybody loves when people do that. I'd have to say my favorite Mando memory is whenever I'd have to say when you guys were live on site at the Super Bowl. I think it's fun when you guys get out of your living rooms and have to be live on site with an executive just watching you guys sweat, I find funny.
All right. That's why
For
you're
the-
out, Krista. That's why you're out. Get
For the
out.
record, I'm the one who sweats. Marchand, like he keeps a steely demeanor.
That's right. You guys are stone cold interviewers, you know, in the comfort of your living room, but let's see you out on the streets.
Yeah,
out on
exactly. When
site.
people... Yeah.
Well, I will say that everybody at Sports Business Journal will terribly miss you. I was very upset when I heard this news, and we'll miss you here at the Mando podcast. So good luck, Krista.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Krista.
I'll miss you guys too, but just know that you know, everyone loves covering sports media, so maybe I'll pick it up as a hobby. Maybe you guys will be my colleagues soon.
There you go.
We just want you to comment and like. That's all.
Krista, we love you, but all right, time to go. See you later. Good luck in life.
I'm the one that gives the softballs. Marchand's loaded for bear, though.
I have not agreed to answer any of Marchand's questions.
That's pretty good. That's very good. All right. I think you made it. That'll make it to the end. The last segment.
Taylor
Yeah. So then
Swift.
the Toy Story clip, and I think I wrote it on there, Chris. I mean, AC. It's only
Don't confuse us.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Let's not say we're going fast, but let's just go fast.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I'll like every single post that you guys both do. In fact, now maybe I can start arguing with you on Twitter. How much fun would that be?
There
That'd
you
be
go.
great.
Well, I won't respond, but yeah. Thank you.
Well, you won't respond.
No, I stopped doing that. Every once in a while I do. I start responding to people on Twitter.
Well, this is a sign to everyone to comment on Andrew's posts and try to get him
man,
to.
I just stopped. It's like there's nothing to gain.
Yeah.
There's
I
text me.
respond. I
Text
respond
me.
once. I have a rule. One response and then that's it.
All right. Well, I'll try to give you guys some good call of the week recommendations too. And also as well, any Swiftie news I hear, I'll be sure to send you guys.
You had the big. That's what I thought was gonna be your number one moment, was Swiftie last week. Well, listen,
Swiftie
congratulations.
was good. That was really good. In fact, I think I had a lot of people reach out to me about how much I know about Taylor Swift,
There you
and people
go.
arguing with me that it's not a publicity stunt. So at this point now, I don't know if they're dating or not, but I 1000% believe that they met in that locker room in Arrowhead Stadium.
And AC, if we put like a little, like after I said we have to talk about Taylor Swift, maybe like a drop of like 5 seconds of her song if you can.
So you're saying that was the blank space to write into?
Yeah, exactly. Bam,
Ooh,
or
I
just leave
like
this.
that.
That's
good.
good. Just leave that, or maybe that's what this is for bloopers. All right. Do you want to start over?
Yeah, let's start over.